The Internet of Things is almost upon us, with new data flows, security questions, connectivity issues, and a host of other things for IT managers to worry about. It seems that the IoT brings with it a host of problems. The Internet of Things is redefining what a computer is and what a network node is. So let's start with the basics. How does an organization manage these things?
Well, in some cases, you may choose to manage different parts of your IoT environment. Management really is about being able to understand what are the devices that you have and what do those devices do. And so part of it is really about discovery. So if you think about IoT, there's multiple parts of it. One is discovery and understanding the devices that are out there. And then it's about how you manage them and using different capabilities to manage those devices.
If you talk to ARM, and obviously ARM are a little bit biased because they want this number to go, is billions of devices in the next few years. Where it becomes increasingly complex is that the original model was we'll create 1 billion devices and they'll all connect to the cloud. That doesn't work. We've increasingly seen we're implementing multiple tiers of architecture. There's an end device which may connect directly to the cloud, but more likely has some sort of edge gateway. And then there's edge on-premise processing, and then there's local processing, and then there's the hyperscale global data centers. Management is a sprawling topic across all of these. How do I manage those infrastructure components? How do I manage and patch the end device? How do I manage the network across all of it? What we need is the ability to create a fully software-defined, scalable approach to doing all those parts.
First of all, I don't think the organization really knows how to manage this thing. What it will happen is the similar things what happened with the phones. And before we had these gadgets, you would get hired to some place and they will give you a computer. Now they give you a phone, but you can also bring your own phone. Now there's a huge thing about what they call bring your own device, right? And it was solved this way or another, but it was solved. I think the similar things are going to happen with these smaller devices, like how do I make my smartwatch working within the environment of the enterprise? It will be solved in the same direction as bring your own devices, but how exactly, nobody knows.
Develop a use case first and foremost. So you need to have a purpose for IoT, like any other part of the ICT field. I would say the ICT field is replete with stories, and the organizations that deploy technology replete with stories of failed implementations. And so IoT is no different in that organizations, be it a high street bank or an insurance company for that matter, needs to understand why it is technology needs to be deployed. So in other words, find a purpose, a use case, as we like to say in the technology industry, and IoT is evolving as a means to an end. So that's where all these connected devices come in. Like any other solution, it brought complexity, and so management of that complexity is key. You need to be able to understand how it is you're going to deploy the devices, and how, not just that, but also how information is going to benefit the organization. So operational data will be created invariably, but joining people up is instrumental to the success of that effort. So if you don't have the people, the processes, technology aligned, the chances of success are lower.
Yeah, well, what we face is an unprecedented management challenge, because essentially if a device has computing power, it's going to be on the network. So it's extraordinarily difficult to do this. I think one way of doing it is to actually allow the network actually autonomously manage itself. So when you look at hierarchical control systems, one of the key rules is you delegate responsibility down to the lowest level that's possible. And I think that's what we have to do, is basically actively design the IoT network so that the management functions are delegated as low as possible. I think what is needed is actually a reference model for IoT management. So the ISO OSI model, Open Systems Interconnect model, was a real breakthrough in terms of actually how networks are managed and defining, the data link layer, the network layer. And I think we actually need an equivalent reference model, because at the moment it's like the Wild West.
Managing the IoT means making it secure. When we talk about securing the IoT, what does that mean in practice?
Well, we look at managing IoT devices, I think, differently than other organizations, because really what we believe is that it really starts at the beginning of whatever that device is. And so our view is that you want to start with an IoT device to have what we call a digital birth certificate. So then you know, by putting a key or putting a certificate in that device, you know that that's a genuine device. Then, once you know that's a genuine device, then that device can connect to a server or to any other database. And that database then knows that that device is genuine. So it starts with being able to authenticate and have a very genuine IoT device that you know what that device is.
More to the point about security, though, security is a problem because these devices aren't connected, and because of the complexity and the disparate systems that I mentioned, the various operating systems that come with these devices, oftentimes updates haven't been applied over the years, and so they are more prone to attacks. And we heard at this conference about internet-connected kettles at Hargreaves Lansdowne. We're bringing down trading platforms in the UK. So that's a pretty good example of how it's a Pandora's box, a can of worms, if you will, IoT security, and that's just because of all the possibilities, the chances for breaches that come with the various connected devices that people are trying to really glean information from to the benefit of the organization. So.
Well, we have to secure from the edge to the core of the data center, and this means end-to-end software management. In a previous career, I worked with Intel, and we had a vision of securing from the network, the edge of the network actually, to the server, from a Quark device to even an Itanium or Xeon. And the people that get it right will be the people that will be able to deliver end-to-end security, and that should be security as a service. I haven't seen an offering in the marketplace that actually meets that requirement, but it has to come, and whoever does it will be a winner.
A lot of the thinking behind 5G networks and Wi-Fi 6 has to do with the IoT. So are these new networks up to the challenges of the IoT?
I don't believe 5G is really going to solve security challenges for security. Now, don't get me wrong, 5G does bring some good benefits to IoT, particularly around reducing latency and providing higher bandwidth, and potentially lower costs as a result of those things. But to trust the underlying network for your security, I think, is a fool's game. Many years ago, Google with their Beyond Corp initiative and Forrester with their Zero Trust initiative set about saying, don't trust the network, do Zero Trust, which predicates building connectivity between your applications, which fundamentally doesn't trust the underlying network and infrastructure. That is the way to ensure you have a much higher level of security natively built by design, and that's what we do with NetFoundry. And fundamentally that is saying, don't trust the underlying network. So cool, bring along the 5G network, bring along more security, that is definitely an add-on, but I personally wouldn't be relying on that to build security into my solution.
Well, first of all, we need to understand what are the challenges of IoT. And people, when you talk about 5G, and you hear two things. Okay, one is the number of devices, and the second thing is the bandwidth. I think the latency is yet another thing that people are not quite dealt with, and it has to deal with the changing of the protocols, because a lot of overhead is on the endpoint, on the software, and the way protocol is built. In order to make these devices be able to deliver on their promise, like real-time decision-making at a very short time constants, there is a whole bunch of technology that needs to be developed and applied.
For the most part, the IoT is not regulated. It's a bit like the American Wild West. So what are the issues, such as ethics and regulation? And should we be looking for guidance or regulation from governments?
Well, I think the areas that we've seen government get involved in, especially around data privacy and privacy about your information and your healthcare, speaking of healthcare, I think is a very important one. I think we will see more regulation. It's always how much regulation do you really want to have to be able to not stifle the growth of an industry like that? And I think really it is still about data privacy around those devices. So those devices are going to provide a lot of information. And so making sure, just like we are today, protecting personal information is key. And so laws like GDPR and some of the other laws we're seeing worldwide help improve that capability?
I think that the ethics has to deal with the availability of the information, of data, who can access to the data, and how you can access to the data. I think in general, the more open this environment is, the better off we as humanity will be. You know, the big regimes, they failed in the last century once communication became more and more open. And in terms of ethics and per se, there needs to be dealt case by case. Who has an access to what information, what it can do with this.
I think so, and take the issue of drones as an IoT device. We've already seen the impact, say, in Heathrow Airport or Dublin Airport and probably countless other airports. So certainly in specific areas like drones, we need to have better regulation. IoT is like any other tool. It can be used goodly or badly, and we need to have the right ethical considerations considered and the right regulatory environment. And I mentioned earlier, it is a little bit like the Wild West, and policymakers are really struggling to keep up with the speed of advances, which are really breathtaking. So I think something like the equivalent of GDPR, which really sort of reined in a lot of cowboy stuff that was going on in data protection, we probably need the equivalent of that. And who else but perhaps the European Commission might be the organization that actually presents that to us.
The IoT is set to be a smashing success, with billions and billions of connected devices. In 10 years, though, we may have second thoughts. What will we think in 10 years' time that we could or should have done differently?
Well, I think there is a lot of capability for misuse. So if we start thinking about IoT devices that affect you personally, whether it's medical devices, how much information is a company collecting on you? What do they know about you? Will they change the way that they provide insurance for you? Same thing there's ethical issues about autonomous cars. Let's call an autonomous car an IoT devices. Okay, so when you're doing the software program for that car, there really is a choice about if you're going to crash, do you run over somebody in the crosswalk or do you crash into the building? So those become real ethical issues that we're going to have to grapple with for many, many years to come.
Security is the biggest implementation challenge of IoT, according to many, many, many different surveys, which is a good thing in that it would imply that there are IoT solutions which are not being rolled out, which, if they were being rolled out, would cause issues from that security part. Nonetheless, there are still far too many IoT solutions being rolled out which are not secure enough. I do personally believe it's a matter of time before someone makes a mistake, connects a system that shouldn't be connected, and ultimately through a chain of events leads to people losing their life. In fact, recently there might have been one around healthcare and devices being hacked. Those are the sorts of situations where really people need to be not taking the traditional approach of building perimeter security, thinking by putting it just on a mobile network and a private APN, or having some perimeter firewalls, or maybe just using the public internet with mutual TLS. That is not sufficient. We need to really take security seriously when people's lives are at risk.
Most important thing to get into people's head, and it's not going to work, it's not going to happen, but we can hope, is security by design, privacy by design. If we can put those two things practically in people's head and having them think about it, we're going to save a lot of trouble in the future.
The IoT is still shiny and new, but to avoid the problems that have been baked into other recently introduced technologies, it seems we need to think about security first and foremost. Time will tell if that happens.